Well, hello everyone, and welcome to Battlechat number 12. I'm your host, Henry Hyde, and today I'm really excited because I've managed to get someone to come on the show who I've admired for a long time. Actually, as we'll mention later on, I think we first met back in something like 2009, back in the days when I was running Battlegames, relatively early days for Battlegames, because I had always been interested in getting to talk to the guys at Osprey Publishing, because, like I'm sure pretty much all of us, I've been a fan of those little men-at-arms books and campaign series and so forth from Osprey Publishing ever since I can remember, really, for a long, long time. And I was lucky enough to get an invitation to go along to their offices in Oxford, as they were at the time, and met a number of the guys there, the design team, the marketing team, and one of the people that stuck in my memory the most was the gentleman I've invited onto the show today, Mr. Joe McCullough. Hello, Joe.
Hello.
And yes, fond memories there, Joe, because I remember as part of that, well, the end of the meeting, the second half of the meeting, actually, we played a Cowboys game in your offices, didn't we?
I seem to remember dying a lot in that.
Yeah, me too. Was there some rules that your colleague Phil had written, I think?
Yeah.
Yeah, he had I won't say he was cheating, but my guy got killed pretty much straight away, and that was that, really. He was super accurate with his Winchester rifle, I seem to remember. But anyway, but no, Joe, it's really fantastic to have you on the show. Thank you so much for coming on.
No
problem. I've been deluged with questions. I already had quite a few things that I wanted to ask you about. And it's apposite that you're coming on at the moment, because not only are you well known in the gaming world for your input into Osprey publications, but then, of course, particularly Frostgrave, which is now a few years old, isn't it?
Yeah.
And, of course, you've now come out with your own, and I say your own, self-published rule set, which is called Rangers of Shadow Deep. And that's on sale on RPG Now /Wargame Vault, and we'll give people proper addresses for that later.
Right.
So you're obviously at kind of an exciting point in your career and branching out on your own. But I think for people who don't, I've got a couple of hundred patrons, and this eventually will go out to the wider world as well. And there's a lot of people, obviously, who do know you and know who you are. But I don't think it would hurt to start out by giving some kind of overview of your career to date. I mean, I first met you at Osprey. What was your history before Osprey, Joe?
Okay, well, as your listeners can probably tell, I'm not from Britain originally.
Really?
I grew up in North Carolina and have never quite adopted the accent. But sometime after college in the U.S., I decided, for reasons that aren't really even clear to me, that I would go to graduate school for creative writing, and I would do that in Bangor in North Wales. Having never been there, having no real knowledge of what it was like, but I did that, and it was quite an experience. I never actually finished the course, but I met a lovely young woman there and got married, and thus ended up staying in Britain. She was from Kent, and
so it wasn't a Welsh girl either. So she'd come a long way as well.
It's quite a random story, but with a happy ending. So.
Yeah.
But when she finished uni, we just basically said, all right, whoever gets a job first, that's where we'll go. And not having any real skills, having been a failed creative writer, I just started looking around, and I saw one day on the Osprey Publishing website that they had an opening in their production department. And like yourself, for as long as I can remember, I've been loving the Men-at-Arms books and that the artwork by Angus McBride specifically.
Yeah, great man.
And so I went there, I interviewed, and I got a job as a production assistant. It turns out I wasn't actually very good at production, so I didn't last real long in the production department. But thankfully, Osprey is a company that really values its employees and really recognizes their talents, and thus, after not too long, I got shifted over into marketing, which was a much better fit for me. And pretty soon after I got to Osprey, they started developing Field of Glory, which was the first war game they published with Slytherin.
Yeah, because I was going to mention that's kind of round about the time that I first met you, wasn't it? Sort of like 2008, 2009, something like that.
That's probably right.
And because I remember coming and asking you at the time, because I did an interview for Battlegames.
Right.
I remember asking you at the time, Field and Glory, this is interesting. Osprey actually getting involved with war game stuff. And of course, I had no idea how much things would mushroom after that meeting.
I don't think anyone did. As sort of a point of that, at the last moment before the book went to publication, it was decided that the rulebook had to have a painting guide in it, and no one had thought about that previously. Right. And at the time, I was the only wargamer actually working at Osprey, so I got to spend a day painting a Roman soldier and taking pictures of it stage by stage. And so I wrote the painting guide in Field of Glory, which I guess is my first wargaming publication. But I don't. At the time, that was really considered a kind of a one-off thing, with potential supplements, and actually ended up going, I think, 13 supplements for the game. But no one had thought, we're going to launch an entire line this way. And so at the time, I was really getting into a little game called Ambush Alley, which is a modern asymmetrical war game. And I just suggested, hey, if we're going to look to do more war games, why don't we look into this one? And that idea got taken up. That became expanded and became Force on Force, which itself had a good dozen supplements. And from there, Phil Smith, who you mentioned earlier and who's now head of Osprey Games, launched a little series called the Osprey War Games series, known, I think, more often as the Blue Book War Games series, which has got about 20 titles so far. And I think that's the point at which everybody started to take notice and went, wow, this is actually a going concern. We can really do something with this. And and since then it's slowly grown, and now includes some board and card games, includes numerous war games, and includes making miniatures with North Star. So it's really grown hugely. And at the same time, my position is, in truth, wandered all over the company. So I did marketing, and then I did editorial for a while, and then I went back to marketing for games. I did both simultaneously. And so that's kind of my time with Osprey. Most of it spent in marketing, and a lot of that marketing games, which is great.
I mean, it is a unique thing, really, that you kind of managed to get into a company and essentially sort of mold your job around your interests. I mean, it's quite an amazing thing. And certainly, war games in general, I think, are delighted because, for all those years, we always equated Osprey with military history of a particular kind that was just especially useful to, obviously, military modelers, originally, and war gamers. I think there's an awful lot of titles that came out that have been a delight for war gamers, because instead of just being a generic overview of a period, I mean, you really get intensely into Roman uniforms in Britain, 63 AD to 64 AD, almost kind of thing. Some people mock it as cheese pairing. Right. But actually, I know if you're actually collecting a very specific war games army for a very specific period, it's fantastic that actually, in most cases, you can find an Osprey book somewhere that deals with precisely that thing that you need. Yep. After all, if you think of the Austro-Prussian War of 1866, that was only a 1-year war, but there's a book about the Prussians and there's a book about the Austrians, and that's fantastic. In fact, there's 2 of each, isn't it? Because there's the cavalry books and there's the infantry books. So there's 4 books on 1 year of conflict, which is fantastic and incredibly useful. And I think, I don't know if it had ever occurred to the wargaming community at large, I think Osprey should do games. I think that, they should actually produce war games. So when you started doing that, starting with the Field of Glory stuff, and then, as you say, all the blue books, including some by my mate Dan Mersey, of course,
good ones, yeah,
and Keith Flint, who I've interviewed on this show. It's been amazing because I think that they're, that really nice little format that's just, literally handy to flick through, and the rules are, simple enough to not need 400 pages, but also, they're often quite clever mechanisms in some of these rule sets that you've been publishing, and of course it's affordable because they're at that budget price as well, at a time when, as we know, so many, let's not mention any names, rule sets out there are, you're talking 30, 35 quid to buy essentially a book of rules with a bit of fluff in. I think it's great that sort of budget option exists. So it must have been quite exciting to have been part of this, thing that was happening. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's been great because it really grew out of the kind of skills and interests of people who were at Osprey. Like I said, so it's myself, so Phil, Richard Sullivan, who is the managing director there and has encouraged the whole thing, and it's been really great because I guess unlike most gaming companies that just build a rule set and focus everything on that, Osprey has been about finding authors and finding interesting rule sets that maybe aren't associated with miniatures or don't need to be backed by a big company or just too small to do that. So it's, as it's one of the few places you can actually go if you've got a rule set that you want to publish traditionally. Then send it to Osprey because you get a good looking book out of it. So.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned a little earlier that, of course, the other thing that happened as you started producing all the books was this kind of tie-in with North Star for miniatures and stuff. How did that come about?
I can't fully remember if I'm being honest. I think that Nick Eyre at North Star just kind of approached us out of the blue one day and asked if he could do miniatures for one of the games. I think it was in Her Majesty's Name. I'm not 100% sure, but regardless of kind of how that first contact happened, very quickly we went up and visited him, and he came down and visited us, and just kind of really struck up a great relationship between the gang at Osprey and the gang at North Star. That we just really had a lot of the same mentality in gaming and in kind of marketing games. And so, at first he was just kind of, I guess, licensing the rights to specific games to do figures. And then with Frostgrave, I believe it's the first one where Osprey Games and North Star actually jointly produced them and have together pushed them out and sold them. So, and it's just grown and grown and grown, and it's been great. So,
I mean, Nick's a really nice guy. I mean, I've known him for ages, because of my contact, with Battlegames and that kind of stuff. Yeah. And he's a really nice guy, very down to earth, very shrewd guy as well. I think this is the thing. I mean, he's actually, over the years, he's built a considerable empire. If you go to the North Star website now and you kind of scroll and you think, oh my God, he does that, and that's him as well. Oh my God, and he's that as well. Oh my God. So it's
a testament to how much people like him. So so many sculptors, Mark Owen at Artisan and Copplestone, and have turned their kind of operation ends over to him because they trust him, they like him, and because it's a great place to disseminate your miniatures, I suppose. Yeah. So.
I mean, I have to. Nick's one of the people I want to get on the show at some point because, as I say, he is a shrewd guy, and he has played a role in the hobby that as you mentioned there, I don't think many people know necessarily about that obviously you get quite a lot of creative people in this hobby who may be fantastic at sculpting miniatures or whatever, but they're not necessarily business people. They don't necessarily have the skills to actually take their stuff to market, and because a lot of creative people are quite introvert and shy and aren't necessarily.
That's not Nick, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so he brings that skill set in that can make the difference between someone who can survive and thrive as a miniature sculptor, or have to go and get a new day job. It's that kind of difference. So thanks for mentioning him. But also, it segues nicely because, of course, in there we've mentioned the F word, Frostgrave, which I will retrieve on my iPad, which seems to have disappeared. There it is, it's a Frostgrave. A marvellous thing. I did have a hard copy, but I think I've lent it to someone, and what's that rule? Never lend books to people. There we go.
Not if you want them back.
Exactly. So you'll be pleased to know, as the author, I've been and bought another copy of Frostgrave as PDF.
Beautiful.
But so... First of all, tell us something about how that came about. What inspired you to write a set of fantasy rules? And when obviously there's quite a few other sets of fantasy rules out there, but also the thing that I'm really interested in is because you take this very interesting kind of premise with the backstory and so forth, and for anyone who's not played the game or hasn't read the rules, what's really fascinating about this is the concept of this lost city that is literally hidden under a glacier or something of that kind for millennia, and then comes to light again. This ruined city emerges again, but the thing that's important about this ruined city is its magical powers, and therefore the characters that dominate the game are not the butch, or clad in armor fighter-y types who just go around chopping off dragons' heads. It's the wizards, the magicians, the witches. So can you give us some background about that, Joe, about how, what inspired you to do that, and tell us something more about the game?
Okay. So it all kind of started one day at Osprey when I was complaining to Phil. So it all starts with a complaint that basically there was no fantasy game out there that was doing exactly what I wanted in a game. And I think Phil got tired of listening to me basically and said, well, why don't you just shut up and go write one then? And he said, if it's good enough, I'll publish it. So, which probably was more to shut me up than it was to get a rule set. But, so I went away and I started thinking about it. And one of the things, there's a couple of different aspects that come together. One, growing up in the U.S., my gaming experience, I think, is very different to one that someone will have in the U.K.
Sure.
So in the U.S., kind of all of gaming, tabletop gaming anyway, grows out of Dungeons and Dragons. Over here, a lot of it grows out of an older tradition of toy soldiers.
Yeah.
So coming out of D&D, I was more used to wizards. I was more used to an open play kind of style. And also over there, your biggest miniature manufacturer other than Games Workshop at the time was Reaper Miniatures, who mainly do stuff for Dungeons & Dragons, and they have an infinite number of wizard models. Yeah. And I came over here, and you never need a wizard model, or if you might need one in your army, that's it. And so I thought, man, I want a game where I get to use these wizards, and also at the same time, mechanically, I was growing a little tired of skirmish war games where essentially all you did was walk at each other and push each other until somebody fell over, which
the rugby scrum approach.
Yeah, it's kind of, I think it's part of a fact of if you take big battle games and then reduce them down, so you've got the same mechanics that you have, but you don't have the same kind of maneuver that's important at the big level. So it really is just a run and roll dice. So. But by making magic a huge element of the game, it gave players something really to think about and do each turn, as opposed to just, I have an archer, so I'm going to shoot him, or I have a warrior, I'm going to charge it. Yeah. This is to make it, to give it that tactical element of what is the best spell I can cast this turn. And at the same time, I love games that are just kind of really wild, a little bit out of control, with lots of moments of, oh my gosh, I can't believe that happened. So I went and invented a system that's pretty wild, and a lot of weird things can happen, and hopefully makes you laugh a lot, because that's what I want to do when I'm playing a war game. So as for the setting took a little longer, actually, because I think originally I was going to set it in kind of a lost city in the desert, and then I thought, that's been done before. Although maybe not, I don't know. But about a year previous to writing it, I'd surprised my wife with a trip to Tallinn, the capital of Estonia.
Oh, right.
But I hadn't fully thought it through, and I booked this trip in February, not realizing just how far north Estonia is. So, so we got there, and the entire trip was at negative 13 degrees or lower.
Oh my God!
But it was wonderful, because Tallinn is the center of it anyway, is this well-preserved medieval city. And it snowed the first day we were there, and of course it never melted because it was negative 13 degrees, and there were no tourists because nobody else was dumb enough to go in February. So we actually had this wonderful trip of just kind of wandering around in the snow, looking at medieval buildings and ruins and churches. And so I think I drew a lot on that, and I thought, well, actually that's a great setting for a game. And I did worry a little bit that nobody's going to want to snow base their miniatures and snow base their terrain, because then they won't be able to use it for anything else. But then I went, forget it. I'm going to do it anyway. And so that's where that comes from. And amazingly, a lot of people have actually, I think, seen that as an opportunity to really push their model making and their painting and their terrain building in new directions.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
All worked out.
I mean, I suppose I ought to ask, what the hell prepossessed you to take a holiday in Estonia in February?
Well, remember, you're talking to the guy who went to university in Bangor for no reason.
There is that. Yeah.
I think, honestly, I just saw a picture of it one day. I just saw a picture of kind of the medieval city, and I thought, wow, I have never been to a place like that. I'm going. And then...
Fantastic.
Yeah, February was just... It may have been, maybe it was Valentine's Day. I don't know, but it was dumb.
No, fantastic.
Dumb, but worked out,
Fantastic. No, it's one of those places. I can remember, back thinking way back history lessons, the Baltic states and all that kind of stuff. It's Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania, and
there's great military history there.
Fantastic. And of course, listeners will be happy to know that you can buy Osprey books on the appropriate subject.
Yes, you can. And it's great because, being American especially, but even in Britain, there's so much, you don't see that style of kind of uniform much, and the armor of the time. It's a very different aesthetic, so it's really neat to kind of go see that.
Absolutely.
Those differences.
There's a number of questions that are buzzing in my head. I mean, the thing about the setting and the different kind of painting challenges and that kind of stuff that throws up. I mean, obviously in the book, you've got these wonderful photographs. I think the painting's mostly by Kevin Dallimore, is it?
Yeah, I think all of it in the first book is.
Yeah, I mean, it's just fabulous stuff. I mean, it is so different from anything else. And I think also because, of course, the setting is snowy, the colours really pop. Whatever kind of costumes people are wearing, it really kind of pops against that sort of, grey and white and bluish, cold-looking background. Also, there's a shout-out to a friend of mine who's also a patron, Simon Tonkis, who's known as Goat Major online, and he's on Twitter and stuff. And I know he, with his son, plays a lot of Frostgrave and has made some amazing kind of scenery. Because one of the other things people need to know about the game, if they haven't seen it or played it, is it can be played in really quite a compact area. I mean, in the book you mentioned as small as 2 feet squares. Certainly, I think the biggest you mentioned is kind of 4 feet square board.
Yeah.
And a typical game would take, what, an hour or two, something like that?
Yeah, with 2 players, you'd probably easily get it done in a couple hours. It goes up from there with more players. But on a 2x2 board, it'll probably be done in an hour and a half. It's cool. The short knife fight of a game. So.
Yeah, except with spells and stuff. And one of the things that's also noticeable and unusual nowadays to find, particularly in something that's branded as a war game as opposed to a pure role-playing game, is D20s. You're not a D6 kind of guy. Taking me back in the day, because many years ago at university I used to play Dungeons and Dragons, so percentage dice and that kind of stuff is something that I'm relatively familiar with. And because most of the war gamers listening to the show are of a certain age, if one's polite, I'm sure D20s, I've got some of those somewhere. So here's a set of rules, guys, where you can dig out your D20s. So was it because of your role-playing background that inspired you to use the D20s?
Yeah, so partly it was a throwback to Dungeons and Dragons. Partly it's just... Well, one of the main goals I set out when I started to design the system was I wanted to see if I could get combat down to as few die rolls as possible, because I'm not a big fan of the basically rolling 3 or 4 times to get a result.
Yeah.
So, and I realized early on that was going to be impossible using a D6. There's just not enough variation on the dice. So taking that into account, once I'd gotten rid of the D6, I thought, well, I might as well kind of go up to the D&D die, and then even more so use 2 of them in combat resolution. But so, yeah, it was both a throwback and a mechanical decision, and I think it's worked out well. It is one of the things. There are some people that immediately look at it and almost can't take it because it's too swingy. And there is an element of truth in that. It is a more, I guess, swingy game than most. I don't think it's quite as true as a lot of people think. The mechanics, the mathematics of it are actually a lot more complicated than just roll a D20. But like I said, I wanted a wild game, and having more possibilities on the dice helps with that.
Yeah.
And also, I wanted a game where, the combat between 2 guys with swords was not the focus of the game. So while your guy who's better at a sword has a slight advantage, it's only slight, and really you need to be focusing on what your wizard's doing and how he's supporting that combat, and not just relying on your slightly better swordsman to win. So.
One of the other things is that, again, is a delight and takes me back to the days of Dungeons and Dragons is a wizard isn't just a wizard. I mean, you've got all kind of different types of wizards and schools of magic. One of the things, looking through the book, I mean, gosh, chronomancers, love that. Chronomancer. that was a new one on me, I have to say. Elementalists, illusionists, enchanters, necromancers, sigillists, soothsayers, summoners, thaumaturge. You've brought out some beautiful words there, Joe. I can tell you're a writer. Witches and so forth, and then of course you've got all the different spells, and you've got apprentices and all that kind of stuff. I mean, you must have had so much fun dreaming up this stuff, right?
Yeah, it was interesting. The primary writing of the book really took place in about 10 days. My wife and I were in the Lake District for kind of a half writing holiday. So I'd write for 3 hours or so in the morning, and then we'd go out for some lovely walks. And most of what's in the book was written there. I think a lot of it was already in my head when I came to write it. But yeah, it was, at first it was just an exercise in what cool things can I think of, and plop them down on a page, and I'll sort out the rules later. But yeah, again, like I said, there's so many wizard miniatures out there that they can't just be a generic wizard. They need to be more differentiated than that.
Yeah. No, it's great. I mean, and also, of course, then you've got your kind of your henchmen, the actual fighter guys as well. So anyone who thinks, oh, it's just wishy-washy wizards, no, it isn't. I mean, there's some lovely brutes on the field of battle as well. If you want that kind of thumping, crashing kind of stuff, it is there, and there's proper combat and what have you. But I think, as I say, for me, the thing that kind of really piqued my interest was that there's this emphasis on the magic and the spells and stuff, and so it's I'm going to straightforward recommend it to anyone who hasn't done it, and it's available in as an ebook, PDF, or hard copy from the Osprey website, isn't it?
Yep.
That's right, which is where I got mine. And of course, you've the great old things as well, where people gain experience and they can level up. The thing is, of course, what this also says to me, as a man who's in the process of writing a book about wargaming campaigns, is, of course, this is ideal for having a narrative that goes beyond the game you're playing right now. There's your characters have a past that's enable them to reach this point where they're in the game that you're playing now, and then they have a future where what happens now matters to them down the line. I mean, that, I presume, again, a great take from role.
Again, that kind of goes back to the role-playing background, and I want to, for me, the kind of whole fun of wargaming is watching a story unfold and being a part of that story and helping to kind of control it, and so I mean it's interesting because I didn't really write a lot about that in the book, partly because it was originally a vision to be part of the OWG series, so it was kept quite short, but also just I just didn't think to write it. It was just so clear to me this is what the game is for. But luckily, I think most people that have picked up the book and enjoy it get that from it, and it's probably what they were looking for anyway. So it's very much a storytelling kind of war game.
And of course, it's one of those things that obviously the fantasy genre lends itself to so much, and you don't see it very often in a historical context. I would say sadly you don't see it very much in a historical context. I mean, obviously there's I'm thinking of Too Fat Lardies, there's games like Sharp Practice and what have you, where Lieutenant insert rude pun of name here of choice, a bit like Richard Sharp in the Bernard Cornwell series, can follow a campaign through Spain and France and what have you, and Flanders, whatever the song was, through Flanders, Portugal and Spain. That was it, wasn't it? But the focus in historical gaming often isn't so much on that heroic individual and their career, as it were. It's more difficult, I suppose, because people feel like, oh God, I've got to do all that historical research and stuff. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think people are perhaps, so it's interesting, like Too Fat Lardies, they do it a lot more with, what is it, Dux Britanniarum, as a real campaign that tells a story. Yeah. And I think one of the reasons that they perhaps felt free to do that was because it's the segue into the Dark Ages where nobody knows what happened anyway. Whereas history, people feel kind of constrained by the actual history. But that's never a constraint I've felt, especially dealing with fantasy anyway.
Yeah, and I'm an imaginations guy, so.
But there's also an element, and you know this from Imaginations, so much of wargaming for a lot of people does not happen when you're playing on a table. It's happening before and after that, when you're painting your minis, or you're building your army, or in Frostgrave you're working out your experience points and your levels and what treasure you got and what you want to buy, and I think we're seeing a lot more of that, and I think that's something really good and something that should be encouraged, and something I want to encourage with my games is this hobby has more fun to it than just playing on the table, because most of us can only get together with friends rarely.
Absolutely, yeah.
But we've got a half an hour here or there that we could devote to the hobby, and
No, I agree. I mean, this is why. I mean, Imaginations gaming appeals to me for so many reasons. But as I think you know, one of the things I love doing is creating maps. And I can spend hours, without a miniature in sight, but just kind of dreaming up names and working out geography and geology and, what the population's like. And,
Right.
So far, I've not gone completely Tolkien-esque and invented a whole scad of invented languages.
Right. Is this because, nobody actually knows what all the German princedoms were at the time? So, like, you can make one up and everybody's like, yeah, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think this is one of the things, because interestingly, yes, most imaginations, whoever's doing it, tend to be set in the kind of 18th century, where Central Europe was just this amazing patchwork of tiny principalities and dukedoms and electorates and goodness knows what.
Plenty of space to squeeze another one in.
Absolutely. And in my case, I create the entire world. I mean, some people do take... there's France and there's Prussia, and then in between them there's all this stuff, and there's my little one sort of tucked in there somewhere. Whereas I kind of felt like, that's cheating. So I invent the entire planet, right? Which gives me unlimited possibilities, but also an unlimited workload. So this is going to be something I've been doing to my dying day. But it's just, it's just being able to kind of completely let loose, literally with your imagination. And make stuff up, and also various campaigns and weekends I've run where I've invented people who's got their own imaginations and sort of tucked them into my world as interlopers, on a temporary basis. And it's, hey, what the hell, it's worked out just fine. But so I can kind of understand all the appeal of this, and the Frostgrave background I think is great. I mean, it's it's like, oh gosh, I could dangerously get into that. And of course you have, because now, quite apart from the main rule book, how many supplements are there now, Joe?
More than 2. I'm looking over at the shelf. So there's 6, I believe.
I was going to say must be 6 or 7, certainly half.
Yeah, so there's 6 or 7, and then there's the spin-off Ghost Archipelago, which also has a couple. So yeah, it's been a busy few years.
I bet it has. And now, because I haven't seen the supplements, I must confess, and they're all authored by you.
Yep. So they are. There's one coming out next year that will be the first one that's got some other authors, and that's just because I wanted to let's see what some other people did. So some kind of big namers like Alessio Cavatore and Andrea Sigfoli and Alex Buchel, who did Saga. I've written scenarios because it's such an open world that you can let other people play in it, and that's also another thing. Like even as I've written 6 supplements, I've very much tried to keep the world very blurry around the edges, and not over define what Frostgrave looks like or what it contains, so that people feel free to invent their own stories and to invent their own regions in the city to use whatever terrain they want. I don't want to say it's Romanesque architecture, because maybe that's not the terrain you've got or the terrain you want to build. So
now that's really interesting. So people can basically apply their own preconceptions of what a ruined city should look like and so on. Cool.
Some people want it a bit more steampunk, because it was a magical city to begin with. It could have theoretically looked like anything, and it's great for me because it means I can write basically any type of scenario, and my only justification has to be magic did it.
Yeah.
Magic gone wild. So
this gives me the opportunity to introduce a couple of questions that my patrons have actually asked me to ask you. And it's, are there any plans to take the Frostgrave game to further settings beyond the initial 2?
Okay. Not at the moment. However, there was never a plan to take it beyond the first one. So, there was a point, and I can't remember when it was exactly, but I'd written the first book and I'd written 2 or 3 of the supplements, and I just felt drained. I thought, I got nothing more to say about the Frozen City at the moment, and so I essentially took a break from that by writing Ghost Archipelago. Phil had asked me to do a different setting for it, and at first I was quite reluctant because, a new setting in theory is just a new bestiary and a few new rules for hot weather. But luckily, I took away that, and then slowly this new story started to develop in my head, and with that story came some mechanics, and that all became Ghost Archipelago. So it uses the same core mechanics, but no longer focuses on wizards. It focuses on another group, and hopefully gives a very different game experience, because that's what I wanted. I wanted to say, this isn't just window dressing difference. This is a different game experience, but at the same time, you'll be comfortable enough. So beyond that, I'm sure we'll get onto it, but like Rangers of Shadowdeep again uses some of the same core mechanics, and whether it's part of the same world or not is somewhat up to individual interpretation. But it's certainly a world I love because it's such an open playpen for me. So I'm not going to rule it out, but I'm not working on it at the moment.
Okay, that's cool. And it's kind of segues nicely. Is Joe finding it harder and harder to come up with new Frostgrave material, or is there still a deep well of ideas to tap? Yeah,
so it does play into that. Luckily, creativity is an endless well, and in fact, the more you use creativity, the better you get at it. Yeah, it's a skill like any other. Yeah. That said, you can run temporarily dry, and that's you've got to refill with ideas, and you can do that by reading. You can do that probably best by going and seeing things like going to Tallinn, or just even if it's just going over the hill to the next hill over. Yeah. So yeah, there are times when I feel like I need to take a break from this and do this for a while. Yeah. But I'm not worried about ever running out of ideas, especially in Frostgrave, because it is such a potentially weird place. And anything kind of goes. And so
cool. And it segues nicely because you've mentioned it.
Yep.
Your latest production that's out, exciting for a number of reasons, Rangers of Shadowdeep. Not only because it's a new thing, even though it shares some mechanisms, as you say, but also because this is a self-published venture, Joe. So I'm sure you've got plenty to tell us about that. Again, this one I got from RPG Now Wargame Vault as a download, and we'll give that address at the end of the show, folks. I have to say, beautifully laid out. Really elegant, lovely typography. Being a designer myself, that kind of matters to me. And just a lovely production. Love the kind of sketchy, ink washy type illustrations and stuff. So, Joe, come on then. First of all, how and why did this one come about then, and why self-published?
So. It kind of comes about because of two different ideas I was having. One was a real interest in taking wargaming, working on wargaming so that it could be played either solo or cooperatively. So these are both elements you see a lot in board gaming, and thus I came, as Osprey moved into board and card games, I started to see it more and more. And I think a lot of people these days are looking for a cooperative experience. And again, I guess it goes back to the role playing where you're used to playing on all the same side and having adventures together. So I wanted to see if I could bring that to wargaming. At the same time, I'd gotten this idea for this new setting, which is the Shadowdeep, which is this kind of Mordor-esque realm. But the difference between it and Mordor is that this one actually eats kingdoms. So basically, kingdoms collapse, and then these dark clouds roll over it. and then you've got a new kingdom sitting on the border of this kind of dark cloud sea, and they know that their time is limited before they too collapse. And and then I started to think, well, who the heck would actually go down into the Shadow Deep? And so I thought, well, if you're the kingdom sitting on the border, you send out your scouts and stuff, and your rangers. So I thought, so this is what the story is going to be about. The Rangers of Shadow Deep. They're the guys who have to go in, figure out what the heck's going on, fight this delaying action for as long as they can and stuff like that. So I thought, and one day these two ideas of solo cooperative and the Shadow Deep just came together, and I just had to do it.
Fantastic.
So, and I did, I played around with some solo stuff for Frostgrave, so I had some kind of mechanical ideas for what I could do to still use that system. There are some of the wildness needed to be mitigated because it doesn't work well in a solo way as it does in a competitive. But luckily these were minor tweaks. And I wanted to bring another even step of role playing to it. So in Rangers, your figures have skills, and they interact with the table in more ways than kind of just fighting monsters. You actually can unlock doors and discover traps and different and even more than Frostgrave, it is a narrative. It is designed to tell a story, the story of the exploration of the Shadow Deep, and some of the scenarios even take that one step further by using notes in kind of a choose-your-own-adventure kind of way. Fantastic. You'll move to a point on the table, you'll make your perception skill roll, and if you make it, you read note 362, and that'll tell you what you see. And that may influence this scenario, or it may influence the next scenario, but, So yeah, it's designed to be almost a tabletop role-playing game without a game master.
Right.
That said, I don't think if you played Frostgrave or if you played most other skirmish miniature games, you're not going to have a problem transitioning to it. So,
is it D20 based?
It is D20 based still. It uses, like I said, it uses the same kind of core combat mechanics, but with some mitigating factors. The Rangers especially have heroic abilities, which are kind of these one-use things. Every game they get their set of heroic abilities, and again, that's that. You got to choose: is it best to use it now, or do I save it for later? And it gives that real kind of tactical sense and decision making that I think is important to gaming.
One of the things that I think also you had in Frostgrave, didn't you? Things like permanent injuries. Which fascinated me, where someone can have permanent injury, badly wounded, a close call, or a full recovery at the end of it all. The permanent injuries are great. I mean, you include things like lost toes, smashed leg, crushed arm, lost fingers, never quite as strong again after this game. That's a nice one. Psychological scars. I mean, as a man who supports combat stress, this is extraordinary. Actually seeing this, it's smashed jaw or a lost eye. A lost eye, that could be a real serious thing for someone who uses a bow, of course, if you lose your stereoscopic vision. This kind of detail, I mean, it speaks to me that you're a man who loves character, and that actually the creation of characters that are believable and that are kind of seem like real people. That guy's got a bit of a limp. Oh, where did he lose his eye? Oh, he's lost a finger. What happened there? This is fabulous to me, and speaks to me of someone who I think years ago you mentioned to me that you're also interested in writing fiction. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I started off as a fiction writer as a wannabe fiction writer. That's why I went to Bangor. That's what I was doing before I got to Osprey, and mainly writing short stories and mainly derivative of people like Robert E. Howard, who wrote Benny Conan or H.P. Lovecraft. And I was getting pretty good at it. I was having some minor success, although success as a short story writer is not success in any kind of life-making kind of way. And then kind of after Bangor, I guess partly because I got married and, was living in a different country, I had other things to focus on for a while.
Must have been a bit of a shock, really.
It was. And because, like I said, it's not something that you're likely to make a lot of money doing. It kind of fell by the wayside for a while. I do a bit more now, although now I do that more as a hobby, whereas as wargaming is kind of my job. Lucky me. But I think a lot of those skills that I developed as a fiction writer, have both helped me as writing war games and helped me, develop stories and figure out ways of developing stories. So, and Rangers kind of as opposed to Frostgrave. In Frostgrave, your only real main character is your wizard. In Rangers, you've still got your ranger as your kind of main guy, but you also have companions who are much more they develop as well and can get these permanent injuries so you really kind of build a band, and it's unlike that. It can be a rotating cast of characters. You don't have to bring the same guys with you on each mission, but you can kind of keep them in reserve if you want.
Okay.
But also, it's a game about essentially the war between the Shadow Deep and this kingdom now standing on the border. So it is kind of it's grittier. It's it's a little grimmer than Frostgrave, and guys can get pretty beat up doing
the sound of things. Be careful if you're carrying sharp objects. I would say that man accidentally cuts off own finger. I'm sure that's a possibility. Exactly. So the game, sounds great. I'm going to go away and find someone I can have a game with this with, but also because of the solo possibilities as well. That's really cool, and I wish you enormous luck with it. It looks fantastic and substantial as well. People should understand that this is a couple hundred pages, isn't it?
It's 200 and a bit pages.
And there's all kinds of scenarios involved in there, and as well as all the fighting abilities and the blah 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 blah. It's a huge amount of stuff. But the other thing that's interested me and has interested some of my patrons is this decision to self-publish it. So how's that come about? Congratulations, welcome to my world.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
But what brought that about then, Joe?
A lot of different things. So one of my oldest friends who I met in high school, a guy named Barrett Stanley, happens to be this fantastic visual artist. And I've really wanted an excuse to work with him on something. We used to role play together when we were in high school, and he used to draw all our characters, and
cool.
And now he's doing some kind of independent comic book stuff. But I just said to him, I've got this idea. Any chance you'd want to illustrate it? And then I've got another friend, who I met at Osprey, who's Steve Maiorasso, who's a designer.
Right.
And so, I've got this collection of talented friends, and I thought, man, I got to use these guys in some way. We got to work together on a project. So I got these guys together and started talking about it. And so partly it was a desire to really work with the people I wanted to work with, and what is, I guess, really unusual is to kind of include them in for most companies, if they're getting artwork for a book, they just pay the artist and it's done. Or they pay the designer and it's done. In this case, I wanted to say, look, why don't you come with me on this project and I'll cut you in. Essentially, you are part of the creator. Yeah, exactly. So it's almost like a cooperative kind of setup. And I guess once you start down that road, it gets a little harder to go with traditional publishing anyway. Also, first off, I want to say it's not in any way indicative of my relationship with Osprey, which, obviously is amazing, both as an employee and as a freelance writer. That said, that they've got limitations in like kind of how long it takes to get something published, and because they're already doing Frostgrave and Ghost Archipelago, they're pretty loaded up on Joe games at the moment.
I like that, Joe games.
But also, as you know, as a freelancer, or in my case, kind of a partial freelancer, it's important to have different sources of income.
Yeah.
Because you never know if one's going to go under.
Oh yeah.
So I thought, well, this is my chance to kind of have full control over a game, in the sense of kind of if it gets licensed or things like that, or more perhaps what schedule I want to put things out on. So now, if I have a good idea, I can write it, and I can ask Barrett to illustrate it, and we get it designed, and we can put it out, and that can all happen in the space of a month. Or I can go, you know what, I don't have anything right now. I'm going to let it sit for a bit and then not worry about it. So that played into it too, and I've done a little bit. So I've got I did something called Spellcaster Magazine, of which there's 3 issues, which is kind of a little self-published Frostgrave-based magazine, which I'd put up on RPG Now. And I'd actually had some decent success with. I mean, they're not very expensive, so I was never going to make a lot of money on it. But
tell me about it.
Yeah, but it was still money, and it was still and it was fun, and that was the key. That I actually really enjoyed having this control over it and putting it up and then doing just kind of almost everything for all the marketing myself, which, I obviously have a lot of experience doing. So that showed me that there was an outlet that I could self-publish through. And so it all just kind of came together. And I'm a guy who gets bored quite easily. Yeah. So I'm always looking for, how can I do this differently than I've done what's gone before? In the same way that Ghost Archipelago had to have different core mechanics in some ways than Frostgrave, this game, I wanted to try a different form of publishing.
Sure.
Now luckily, because of the success of Frostgrave, I can self-publish something and have a hope that people will hear about it. If you're just a wargamer, a wannabe war games designer, I'm not sure I would suggest self-publishing as the immediate route, because you're going to have a very hard time getting anyone to pay attention to it.
It was a bit like with my Patreon venture. You really need to have your own tribe. First.
Yeah, you do, and luckily, Frostgrave has given me that, so I have this, and it was kind of. In all honesty, I could probably make more money going with a traditional publisher, but combine the money I will make with the amount of fun I'm having and with the experience of trying something new, and it just became the better idea. And actually, we've just got it set up so it's print on demand now through RPG Now or War Games Vault, so you can get a nice printed copy. And like you said, it's 200-some pages, so it's a big, chunky, proper looking book, which is great to see and hold, because I love PDFs because it costs you nothing to create them, but there's something about holding that book in your hand that you never quite get over. So
I mean, one of the things I would say is that also, I mean, I'll explain for people who don't necessarily understand the process. Nowadays, when you create artwork for a book or a magazine, your end result is a PDF anyway, because that's what you then send to the printer, a high resolution PDF. Then that PDF it used to be the case when we still had slow internet where, oh my God, I've got a 20 megabyte PDF. Oh my God, I need to squish this down to 1 megabyte or something, because otherwise it's going to take a month for the thing to download, kind of thing.
Right.
Now with fast speed broadband, by and large, pretty much around the planet, that's not the case, and you can now have beautiful looking fairly high resolution PDFs. I mean, my Battlegames for a printer, you need to output to like 300 dots per inch.
Yeah.
So what I used to do effectively is kind of halve that for the PDF version of Battlegames. I had 144 DPI. The maths in that was because screen resolution is 72 DPI.
Right.
Double, there's all this kind of calculation goes on in your head. But now, I mean, I look at the Frostgrave download and I look at this download, and it's like, wow, it's a beautiful looking thing that's really easy to read. Looks great, looks perfect on an iPad. I've got mine open on an iPad. The pages fit absolutely, beautifully, and it all, makes sense. You haven't had to make any compromises, basically.
No.
And I think that increasingly now, I see people now coming to games, they've got the rules on their iPhone or whatever, which is extraordinary. And I think this is one of the things that, even though I've been involved, the one thing I've learned from being involved in self-publishing now for quite a long time, God, it really is a long time. Oh, my God. What was it, 2006? So that's 12 years or more. God. Is that actually you can never quite keep up with the speed of development of the technology that's available and the devices that people are going to read on, and it's sort of exciting and terrifying at the same time, because you think you've done everything absolutely perfectly, and then someone will send you an email and say, I'm on my Galaxy blah 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 blah, this doesn't work. It's like, oh geez, it takes me back to the early days of the internet, where people would complain that, yes, well, I'm on Internet Explorer and it doesn't work on Internet, it works on Netscape but not Internet Explorer. Don't know if you're old enough to remember Netscape, Joe. There you go, showing my age. But it's kind of exciting, but also the routes to market. The other thing, that flows from that is that you made this decision to go with RPG Now / Wargame Vault, as opposed to, of course, Amazon KDP, that kind of route, or even Ingram Spark. So why the Wargame Vault RPG Now, people?
I probably will put it up on Amazon at some point, but RPG Now, Wargames Vault, they're the drive-through RPG. They're all owned by the same company, and they all have the same back end. They've got some really good publisher services. The whole process of uploading a book and getting it to market is just really easy, because I'm not actually a very technically savvy guy.
Right.
Luckily the designer is. So he handles the tough issues. But and you get with RPG Now, as opposed to Amazon, you get real-time reporting of sales. You get real-time money. So, it as soon as they make a sale, that money goes into your account. If you want, you can withdraw it right then.
Yeah.
Or they'll just send it out to you at the end of the month. With Amazon, it's quite murky as to when exactly sales happen. It's 3 months until they send you your money, and you're no longer sure what the money is actually related to.
And there's a perfect storm going on around Amazon KDP right now. A lot of my self-publishing author friends are up in arms because Amazon has been randomly taking titles of theirs off the site with no explanation. The sales reporting's gone really squiffy, and if a lot of these people, this is their living, and if you suddenly can't find out how many you've sold, you've not been receiving the right commissions, and so on and so forth, this can ruin you. So this is really interesting for me to hear.
Okay, yeah.
Actually, Joe.
Another good thing, which won't be relevant to a lot of people, but is to me, you can set up royalties on your titles so that the money, when a copy's sold, I get money, Barrett gets his money, Steve gets his money.
So you can do
I don't
the
have to
split
deal with
right
it.
there.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't have to go back and figure out and send people money. It's all taken care of by them. And their customer service, well, actually, their publisher services are great. Every time I've had any kind of issue, just emailed and they've quickly gotten back to me and dealt with it. So I've had a really good experience with them, and you're getting the same-ish kind of commission, or they're charging the same commission that Amazon is. So Yeah, it's just like I said. It's good. It's easy, and I they don't take advantage of me. And yeah, unlike Amazon, they're very good at telling you like, hey, we've got this big sale coming up.
Yeah,
you can opt in, you can opt out, or you can put it automatically as to whether you want to always be in our sales or always out of our sales. I can go back and email everyone who's bought Rangers, which I've just done to say, hey, the print on demand is now available, and I can set a discount. So I can say, thanks for buying the PDF. If you want to get the print on demand, here's a discount to do that. So yeah, it's just a really elegant kind of system. RPG Now, actually, I've just gotten an email is going to fold into Drive-Thru RPG. Like I said, they're the same thing already, but except they have different front pages. But all the data is going to flow right over because it already was in there anyway. Yeah. So,
I mean, this is music to my ears because actually, I don't know if you know, I've been selling back issues of Battlegames on Wargame Vault for years.
Right.
And end of every month. I mean, some months I might get $20 if I have a good month, because it can happen all of a sudden, because you get those publisher points, don't you, where you can run banner ads and stuff, which is great fun.
Yeah.
And some months I find, oh my god, I've got thousands of publishers, so just click, add banners, add banners, and then another month it's like, why have I only got a couple of hundred points to do this? And it's like, oh, but it's fun, and it means that every month, ka-ching, there's some money in PayPal. Some months it's a bit more than other months. It's and it's useful income. And the thing that I'm listening to you talk about it now, I'm kind of kicking myself because clearly I've not paid enough attention to the number of services they can actually offer me and the options that gives me for other stuff in the future, because at least one of our patrons asked quite a lot of questions about publishing and self-publishing and that kind of stuff. One of the things that people need to be aware of, that I was involved in the campaign dealing with the EU VAT issue that cropped up 2 or 3 years ago now, isn't it? That was, oh my God, you're a micro business and suddenly they're going to treat your VAT the same as if you're a huge corporation like Google or whatever. Right. And it basically was a screw up, and it was the European legislators wanted to prevent companies like Amazon cheating on taxes and stuff. So they thought, right, we're going to do this. And what they hadn't realized is that particularly in the UK, we have a huge micro business base. It's just not the same in France or Germany or Italy and most other European countries. Small businesses kind of looked on in a different kind of way, and they weren't used to how actually innovative British businesses are, where here I am, me, running a one-man show business from a laptop or a computer, and I'm used to doing that. For me, that's normal. Whereas for a lot of people on the continent, that's really unusual. Why would you want to do that? Right. And so they introduced this legislation, and suddenly, thousands, they reckon perhaps 100,000 British micro businesses were up in arms that suddenly they were going to have to do all this massive red tape regulation and log. So if I would have to know, if you were buying a back issue of Battlegames, are you in Estonia or Italy or France or Belgium or the UK, because each of those countries has their own separate rate of VAT. Right. Now, we managed to get, after about 2 years of negotiations with this campaign group that I was kind of involved with, we managed to get a huge amount of concessions, this thing called VATMOS from the British government and what have you, that basically said, right, yes, okay, we need to simplify all this. Dare I mention Brexit? Because what's now going to happen is, if Brexit goes ahead, that hard work all goes in the bin. Simple as that. So this is where actually things like companies like Wargame Vault are incredibly useful, because of course they will take care of all those aspects of handling VAT and all the rest of it. And all you need to worry about is that ka-ching in PayPal or whatever it is at the end of the month.
I actually looked into, why don't I just sell this myself, if I'm going to be doing all the marketing and everything. But then because ebooks are vatable, you realize, actually, I'm going to have to pay a huge amount of VAT.
Yeah.
That's most of what War Games Vault's charging me anyway.
Yeah.
Let them deal with it, and just, it's so much simpler. And then that goes to a point with kind of War Games Vault versus Amazon versus anybody. As you know, if you're self-publishing, you are doing all the marketing yourself.
Yeah.
War Games Vault will actually send out a nice, newsletter or something. But, don't be fooled into thinking because Amazon is this massive company that you're going to be better being on them, because all that means is you're going to be lost in all the stuff they do. And,
Because I think this is the thing, isn't it? That RPG now, drive-through RPG, amalgamated, whatever they're going to be, War Game Vault. I'll stick with War Game Vault. Yeah. At least they know the target market. And they're focused on, hey, we're role-playing, we're board games, we're war games, so... And they do quite a lot of work. I can see it actually promoting themselves. So they advertise in print as well, don't they? Print publications, where they now exist these days. So I think another kind of question, and amongst those things that people ask, that, if you're thinking of self-publishing, first of all, good luck. Secondly, why not? I mean, because I think if you write a book for Osprey, you pay a fee, don't you, rather than royalties? Is that correct? Or do you pay an advance and royalties?
You give an advance on royalties.
You do? Okay.
Yeah.
Because there are some people, if you get published by them, they'll just pay you a one-off fee and you don't get any further royalties down the line.
There are sometimes that's worth doing, but normally I wouldn't do that. I mean, you'll usually get that if you're writing for someone under their licensed property. Yeah. Which makes sense. Warhammer has to own,
of course,
Warhammer. So if you write a book for them, they're just going to pay you, and you're done with it.
I mean, what's interesting, because I can make the comparison, like the Wargaming Compendium and when it's finished, Wargaming campaigns for Pen and Sword, they pay an advance and royalties. I mean, one thing that's happened in recent years, I have to say, is that what they'll give as an advance and as royalties have both been cut fairly drastically. I mean, because obviously the traditional publishing market's under a lot of pressure in recent years because of self-publishers like us, right? Interestingly, a deal I've been offered on a thing by Casemate Publishing, on this particular instance, they'll pay a fee. So then it's a matter of, hey, I need to negotiate the biggest fee I can possibly get, because then they don't pay royalties down the line. And so then as an author, you have to use your experience to think, how many copies of this book do I think they're going to manage to sell? I'd like to think, because I'm famous, they'll sell millions of copies and they're down. I want at least 20% royalties on all that. You're making a fortune from me. Or actually, it's quite a niche little book. Do you know what? That couple of grand sounds quite good as a deal. Whereas in self-publishing, of course, it's, you do all the grunt work up front, and then as exactly as you said there, it's down to you, Gov. It's your ability at marketing and advertising. And the other thing I was going to mention to you, which is social media, because I'm really noisy on social media, always have been, and blogging and that kind of stuff. I wouldn't have been able to start Battlegames at all back in the early 2000s if I hadn't been a noisy bugger online. That's how it all happened, So how do you view social media, Joe? I mean, are you highly active online?
I am these days. It's funny in a way. I was probably one of the last people to get on Facebook, and I only did that basically as a vehicle for my writing. I don't use it particularly for communicating with my friends or family. I'd rather do that by email. But as a means of advertising, it's necessary now. You can't, and probably Facebook more than anything else, I would say, is the place you need to be, and everything else can branch off from that. But I mean, the day I launched Rangers of Shadow Deep, I literally spent 8 hours on social media, both kind of telling new groups, but also answering questions, and in some ways it was very exciting, but it was also a kind of terrible day, because you really shouldn't spend 8 straight hours on social media. It will make you feel sick at the end of it. And so now I've got a system of kind of how I tend to do that throughout a day. So normally So it's like, I guess kind of my typical day is I'll get up and help get the kids off to school. 8 o'clock, I sit down and start writing, and I'll do that for normally about 2.5 to 3 hours. Right. At the end of that, I'm so drained that there's no point in going on. I know that I'll just stare blankly at the screen. And at that point, I usually do a chunk of kind of social media. So I'll go on to the Frostgrave group and the Rangers of Shadow Deep group and a couple of the forums and just see if there's any questions and try to answer those questions. Because, I mean, one thing, if you want to be a successful game writer now, you've got to interact with your audience. And first off, why would you not want to interact with your audience? These are the people that are supporting what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's also fun. I mean, hopefully you love your own game, so you're going to want to talk to people about it, and luckily people do appreciate that, and they're more likely to support you down the road. So, but you also need to limit that time. So I do a chunk then, and then usually I'll go for a bike ride or a walk, depending on the weather. And while that's exercise and needed, it's also really important thinking time.
Yeah, clear the head.
Yeah, because you can't just sit down and write 8 hours. That's not going to happen. So usually what I'm doing is I'm actually coming up with what I'm going to write tomorrow while I'm on that bike ride or walk. Not in kind of detail, but in getting a kind of a hard outline, or I'll start piecing together a scenario, and I know I'll be able to kind of forge those pieces together when I sit down the next day. And then the afternoon is usually admin, play testing, a little bit more social media, but the kind of lighter end of the work, because the creativity, and then if you've done a 8-10 mile bike ride, you're kind of tired anyway.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my typical day.
So it's quite interesting. So you'll sit down and write solidly for like 2 or 3 hours, you're saying. Do you have a specific word count in mind? I mean, you're a kind of 1,000 words a day man?
Yeah, I try to aim for about 1,000. It depends on what I'm working on. Sometimes I know 1,000's impossible. Sometimes I'll go beyond that, especially if it's a big, complicated scenario with bits and pieces, and I know it's going to go beyond that. Though sometimes I'll be like, I got to break this into pieces because I'm getting overwhelmed. But yeah, you really maybe it's just me, but creativity for all its wonder is hard and draining, and after doing a couple hours, 2 or 3 hours, you're shot.
Yeah. So, it's interesting because you're a morning writer, whereas I'm a night owl.
Right. Okay.
And I mean, if I'm on a good day and I'm really on a roll, I can crank out 4,000 or 5,000 words.
Really?
I mean, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it.
Right.
But it is shattering. But I am one of those people who tends to have like a furore scrivendi, or I hit a brick wall. I'm not someone who would just chip away at 500 words a day kind of thing. I suppose also because with my sort of magazine journalism-y thing as well, right. I'm used to thinking. I think back to days of Battlegames where, oh my God, this month I really haven't got a suitable article to fill those 5 pages. Shit, that better be me then. Oh my God, got to be at the printers tomorrow, and sit there and bang the thing out, and then just be collapse in a heap for a couple of days after that, which is why I say I don't recommend it. I mean, it's possible, and it takes me back to the days when I was a student, where I was always social life. Oh shit, essay by tomorrow. Oh my God, back in the days of typewriters and Timex, right. So there was that kind of thing. But no, that's really interesting to hear your kind of routine. I'm just checking up here, because we're going to be wrapping up quite soon, about, yes. So we've answered the question of how many hours a day does he write? When does he write? Yes, so that's brilliant. What does he do to fight inevitable self-doubt that many writers experience? Do you suffer?
I curl into a ball under my desk and cry. Luckily, once you've had a bit of success, it's much easier to deal with things.
Self-confidence grows.
Yeah, it does. I mean, you have to develop a thick skin to start with, because you are going to get rejection. And when I was doing fiction, anybody who does fiction is getting rejected most of the time.
Yeah.
And so then I just turned it into a game and said, how many rejections can I collect? Treat them as points. But that, it's still made for bad days, and it's still, I still get rejected for everything. But because I've had some success, I can go, well, I've already done this, so this didn't work out. That's fine. But also, the best thing you can do is first you go for the bike ride, or you go for the walk, because you need to clear it out, and then you come back and you get back to work.
Yeah.
And you just do something else, or keep doing what you were doing, and because for one thing, the more stuff you have out there, the more likely it is something's gonna catch that.
It's a numbers
zeitgeist. It is, and and a couple of things. Like, first off, I get all the credit for Frostgrave, but so many talented people were involved in that project. Dimitri Burmack, who's the artist who did all the artwork, him and his wife have done all the artwork for the whole series. Phil, the editor, has saved innumerable mistakes that I've made. Nick at North Star, who's helped work on all the figures, and Kevin Dallimore has painted them all and taken the photographs. I mean, these are people who really know what they're doing, and have taken what I made and made it so much better. And same with Rangers of Shadow Deep. The words gain so much by having the artwork sitting next to them. They're gaining a tone that doesn't really even exist in the words, but because it's next to that artwork, it feeds into it. And because both of those were put into a beautiful layout, the whole thing just gives you a sense that isn't there. And so,
the end result is more than the sum of its parts. Yeah.
Yeah. So surrounding yourself with talented people who know what they're doing is another good way to kind of to get through it. It's also good to have someone you can bitch to. So my mother is a writer.
Oh, right.
Yeah, of kind of romances, and so while we don't, our talking shop isn't too specific. A lot of the same things apply, and so she can understand what I'm going through, and so get yourself some writer buddies, and then try not to be too jealous when they have great success, because you will. It's like, oh man, but that's his success has nothing to do with yours, And the last thing is, there is such an element of luck in publishing. You're lucky to get published. You're lucky if anyone notices that what you've published. I mean, I like to think I wrote a great game, but lots of people have written great games that never went anywhere. So, be grateful.
I agree. And also that thing about, don't be jealous of anyone else, because if someone is successful, it's almost like, imagine you're a prisoner in Colditz. The fact that someone manages to make it means, oh my God, it's possible. It takes all those things you say, so luck, right place, right time. The searchlight wasn't on that bit of the wall at that moment, and he got out. That means there's a possibility that I can too. But yes, maintaining that self-belief. I think this is the other thing, that it's almost like when people ask about inspiration and that kind of stuff, I almost think, that's an amateur question. Because the bottom, I think it's Stephen King who says, I sit down in front of my typewriter at 9 o'clock every morning and get inspired. It's a job, and I think it's very different if you're someone like us, who's kind of, I'm doing this for a living, and failure, complete failure isn't an option. So what can I do to make it possible? Some days are going to be better than other days, and some days I look at what's in the bank account and go, oh my God. It literally rattles.
Stephen King's book on writing is a must read for anyone who wants to write, and whether that's war games or fiction. It's a really tremendous work.
And another Stephen Pressfield.
The War of Art.
The War of Art.
Man, I just read that earlier this year, and it's like
hardcore.
It's like being having a drill instructor stand over your shoulder.
It really is.
Right.
It really is.
It's an artist's punch in the face, but it's another one that's definitely worth reading.
Because he was in the Marines or something, wasn't he?
Yeah,
So
he's
a tough guy.
It's very strange to see that applied to art, but it's so true.
But absolutely, so much of it is true, and his whole thing about slaying the dragon, that this thing about writer's block and your inability to work and stuff. Man, you just got to slay that dragon, sit your ass down in the chair and do it. And it's because people have asked me this as well about design and art, illustration, that kind of stuff. My answer is I never start with a completely blank pad of paper. I'll always just sketch out ideas and stuff, and I'll just do a doodle in the corner of the piece of paper if necessary, so it's not a blank piece of paper,
right?
Not a blank page. So it's like, oh, okay. So I don't, and I think the other thing that people don't understand when it comes to writing, and I've mentioned this in shows before, so much is in the editing. It really doesn't. People think they've got to write something perfect right out the gate. Yeah, they think, oh my God, if I haven't written a Nobel Prize winning piece of prose on that first attempt, I'm useless. It's terrible. It doesn't matter. Put any crap down because at least you can edit crap, right?
Yep.
You can edit crap. You can't edit nothing.
Yeah, and I think what you tend to find is it's probably better than you thought it was anyway.
Yeah.
You think, oh, I'm writing pure junk today, and then you come back tomorrow and you go, actually, this is salvageable.
So yeah,
it's just a few words here and there that are off, or I need to put this paragraph above that one. So yeah, it is really just get it done. So people do ask me like, how do I be a writer? And the answer is just you write.
Yeah.
That's really. Everything else is, down the road, but until you write something, it doesn't matter.
I completely agree. Joe, I think it's probably time I let you go.
Yep.
We've been actually nattering for something like an hour and a half. Fantastic, Joe. Thank you so much for your time.
It's been great.
It's been really good having you on, and I think we've all learned quite a lot about your games and how you work and where the inspirations come from. And I suppose I would finish off with, first of all, what are your plans for the future? I mean, it's obviously been going great for the last few years. Where does it go from here?
Well, onward, upward. So having just finished Rangers of Shadow Deep, I don't have any huge kind of like the next game plans, because it was pretty exhausting getting this one out. But at the same time, I've got expansion plans for everything that I've done. So Frostgrave's got more supplements coming. Ghost Archipelago's got another supplement coming. Rangers of Shadow Deep's already got 2 little things that I've already finished writing, and the other guys are doing their part. So there's plenty to come. I do really want to do a Greek myth version kind of Rangers of Shadow Deep. That's almost more of a personal project, just because I love Greek myth. But I think people would like it. But and then at the same time, as all this is going on, we didn't talk about it, but I still work for Osprey, and I've been developing a mass battle fantasy system for them, Oathmark. Which
what's it called again? Sorry,
Oathmark.
Oathmark. Wow.
Yeah, so it's a kind of it's a rank and flank type game, and not the type of game that I've ever developed before. So that's been really, really interesting, and that's kind of in its final stages of my work on it. So that's been really interesting to take a whole nother system and a different, a really just different type of war game. So I'm not taking next year off, but I might stick to staying in kind of the places I've already developed and not go too far. But then down the road, I do have a little list of kind of things I want to get to, but I'm not ready to talk about those yet, because one thing, if you talk about them too early, everybody gets really excited, and you're like, well, it's not for 18 months. So,
and the other danger can be you can talk it and then not want to write it.
Yeah, that's actually, that was a problem I used to have a lot with fiction, was if I told someone the story I was writing, I'd lose the actual inclination to write it, because it's kind of like, well, you've done it, you've got it out. So sometimes it is better to keep it within and make sure it's on the page first. So
Yeah, I'm still going through that currently with the another tome that I'm writing, trying not to tell people too much about it. Hey, it's just wargaming campaigns, but I'm not going to get into any specifics, including the date of publication. But anyway, that's fantastic, Joe. So to kind of finish up, where can people find you online if they want to hunt you down?
Okay.
Like the South Carolina dog you are.
North Carolina.
North Carolina, big
important distinction.
Yeah.
So I've got a blog called The Renaissance Troll, which is both my kind of general hobby blog. So I put up the miniatures I paint, but it's also, I use it for announcing any of the games I've written because my hobby is my job at the moment. So that's my central hub. Then I'm on Facebook, and Facebook for the most part is an extension of my blog. So feel free to friend me on Facebook, and you'll see everything that's on my blog and all the announcements. And and send me a message. You can get my email through my blog. You can send me a message on Facebook, and I try to respond to everybody. Because like I said, you are the people that are supporting me. And I hugely appreciate that. So.
Are you on Twitter as well, Joe?
I am on Twitter. I'm not quite as active on Twitter, but I'm some form of the Renaissance Troll there. I think that number of characters didn't fit, so I can't quite remember.
But if people do a search for you,
I lurk around the kind of Frostgrave parts, so you'll see me bouncing around there. I hang out on Reddit occasionally. So Board Game Geek, I'm there. So yeah, I'm in a lot of places, but probably the blog or Facebook is the easiest one to
Fantastic.
To get hold. So.
All right then, Joe, that's absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much. It's been
thanks for having me on here. It's been great.
No problem at all. I'm sure that folks are going to love listening to everything you've had to say. So thanks so much, Joe. That's fantastic. Cheers.
Bye.